for alfresco dining and musical entertainment. We have also, we are recommending also the conversion of the old Ateneo building into a boutique hotel. There is a lack of hotel and accommodation facilities in Intramuros, and we think this will be a good PPP project. We're also thinking about integrated parking and management system because we anticipate by 2016, if we hit our targets for tourism, we will need a lot more space for tourist buses coming to inside Intramuros. Of course, we're doing all this with, as I said, consultation with the stakeholders in Intramuros. In particular, also these informal sectors in Intramuros. We have a plan for their relocation in cooperation with Gawad Kalina. We are working with other agencies like Escuela Taller for the restoration. We are getting some help from Global Heritage Fund and the UN World Tourism Organization.
All right. For the private sector entities who are with us here, when will this master plan be available? I'm pretty sure a lot of parties will be interested in being part of that.
We are scheduling our meeting with the Intramuros Board of Administrators this month, May. And after that, we will come up with our terms of reference for the bidding for these public-private partnership projects.
Let me ask Gemma Cruz Araneta, who now represents the city of Manila. Manila is, well, Intramuros is part of Manila, but Intramuros, by the way, is under the DOT, the Tourism Department. But for the rest of the city, there's a lot of potential. Give us some of these, the master plan that you've laid out for the city of Manila.
Well, yes, Intramuros is like the Vatican of Manila. They are their own little republic, right? Anyway, we do cooperate with each other. Well, all this talk about heritage tourism or heritage conservation is really very encouraging. But I wonder if people concerned really understand that it is an uphill struggle. For example, it was mentioned here that the Mehan Garden is one of the, or if not the oldest botanical garden in Asia. Well, look what we did to it. There is now an ugly park and ride building there, a university, and you can barely see the Mehan Garden. We also had the oldest police station, the Maysik. It's the oldest police station in Asia. What did we do to Maysik? It is now a shopping mall called Maysik, of course. Anyway, that's why I do hope people who talk about cultural tourism or heritage tourism know what they're talking about. I think the problem is, in this country, any structure that is more than 50 years old is considered ugly, dangerous, therefore it should be demolished. Most of the city engineers and town engineers in this country are very trigger happy. Show them any structure that's more than 50 years old and they're going to demolish it. Because they believe that it is more expensive to restore a heritage building than to demolish it and build a new one. So maybe, I don't know, only the architects can say that. But they don't see the tourism revenue that these heritage structures, when properly restored, can bring to the towns, to the cities, and to the country in general. Now, they also think it is an obstacle to modernization. There is a passion to build high-rises. And it's too bad that Tessie C. Coson is no longer here, because I was going to complain about some of the SMs. In San Fernando, the city declared a heritage district. Then suddenly, in the heart of the heritage district, SM builds a mall. Well, we did try to influence them to please sort of change the design so it will be more appropriate for that section. but to no avail. However, in Santa Ana, we were a bit more successful. If you go to Pedro Hill, there's a Save More. It looks a bit different from the other SMs. That's because the community in Santa Ana, well, accompanied by some representatives of the... Glad that you're here so that we can hold you as an example. There are also several mayors, like the mayor of Talisay, who have seen the light and who are preserving their heritage structures. So may his tribe increase. But maybe you can influence the Mayor's League, right? Ah, thank you. And he can tell his colleagues in the Mayor's League or in the Vice Mayor's League to please pay more attention to their heritage. Because believe it or not, Mayor, sometimes when you go into a town and you ask them, what is there to see?
Well,
Nothing.
While we're talking to the mayor, let's ask him the question. I mean, you brought up the question about developments like condominiums,
and
fast
local
foods, malls.
government.
I mean, to a certain extent, it's also the local government units that ought to have, whether it's zoning or a master plan, that will either exclude or include this in their vision. I mean, let's talk about the Sila experience. You now want to call it the village city, which is patterned after Charlotte, Northern Carolina, where you have heritage buildings and houses as the main tourist draw. Tell us about this.
Actually, I want to re-emphasize is that our city is Talisay City,
Not in Batangas,
which is
but
found
in-
in the province of Negros Occidental, not in Cebu, and not in Batangas. And that's the reason why we are trying to come up with good programs in order to make our own identity. And when I became the mayor of our city in 2006, the first thing that I did was to really to come up with something that could make our own name, our own identity. It's good that we were able to adopt the program of ISA, or Institute for Solidarity in Asia, through the program Performance Governance System, in which we were able to come up with a vision we call the village city a model for balanced development by 2040. Because I believe that having a fully established vision, it is where we can draw our roadmap. Having this richness in our ecological resources, 40% of the forest reserve in Northern Negros is in Talisay. Our city has 8 kilometers coastal areas, and we have these ruins, which is one of the 12 most fascinating ruins in the world, www.ad.com. And we have 2 known heritage sites, the house of the General Aniceto Lacson, the president of the First Negros Republic. And one of the reasons why we were able to get independence in the province of Negros from Spanish colonizers. And we also have the house of Tanadikang. These are structures that we believe can be our asset for us to have our own name. So with the help of ISA, this vision that we have established is now our basis, our goal, our inspiration, where we can come up with good programs. And our partnership with the PPP Center of the Philippines, which, we happened to meet them recently, and they were amazed why we were able to come up with this vision. We know that cultural heritage tourism or heritage tourism, which I believe we can develop our own, can really give a big boost to our city. Local government units has very limited resources, especially when it comes to infrastructure development projects. If we need to have restoration and redevelopment projects in our city, we need partners that could help us out realize this dream. And we're so lucky that the PPP Center of the Philippines, their office, has really reached out to our city because they have heard that we have such dream, that we have such vision. So this is really a big help for us. As what we have heard earlier, this tourism aspect could really give financial resources to our city, especially when it comes to local income. So we need to make our own identity, we need to make our own name, we should make our own attractions for us to be known and to be heard, not only by the people in this country, but people in the whole world.
Right. Thank you, Mayor. But you mentioned that key phrase there, you lack the funds for infrastructure. Let's ask the DPWH, now, Undersecretary. Every mayor in the country is asking for funding for a heritage project. or an urban renewal project in their locality. How do you prioritize? Who gets the funds?
Okay, thank you, David. Good afternoon. Well, although the DPWH is mandated to, take care of the national roads and bridges, as well as flood control, we are now working closely with the DOTC and DOT to ensure all the roads leading to major tourist destinations are well kept and build them in safer, make them safer and quality roads, so that this can be easy access to seaports, airports, and other major tourist destinations. Now, we don't need to mention any more these boundaries because, as mentioned, we deal with national roads. Now, development needs no boundaries because, like municipal roads, city roads, provincial roads. Now, the criteria set in the convergence program of DOT and DOTC, regardless whether it's a national, a city, barangay, or a provincial road, as long as it meets the criteria, it will be funded by the DBM through the convergence program with DOT. And we have tapped a private, non-stock, non-profit organization as far as research and advocacy, the RED Foundation, which help us determine the guidelines and the criteria in the identification, evaluation, prioritization, and funding of tourist spots.
Right, let me ask Paolo and Mark to address the issue raised by Jem earlier about, how to develop a local economy, a local community, using heritage or tourism as a driver, and yet not at the expense of the other developments that are required, like housing, retail. Not all fast foods are bad, obviously. People have to eat. People have to live. Lack of space, you need to grow. You need sometimes have to grow vertically. But there are limits. There are boundaries that have to be set. In the case of Singapore and the other best practices around the world, how is this balanced? Mark?
I think the first thing that I would recommend is to identify those projects which would aid the local regeneration of certain parts of these cities that require the governmental funding support or the ODA support that's been offered to the Philippines. A large number of the projects that have been identified in the pipeline here don't necessarily require ODA funding. Now, ODA funding, in my mind, is not the best solution for PPP frameworks. I say that because often it's tagged to the provision of technology or build from the local territory that's supplying that funding. That'll inhibit the local economic development of the country that's taking the funding. Secondly, ODA funding is not unlimited. It's not infinite. It's got to be directed towards certain areas. And thirdly, almost every single person I speak to in the Philippines about PPP from the private sector says that there is over enough debt and equity liquidity to be investing in these projects. So possibly it's worthwhile looking at prioritizing the tourism projects around heritage and where regeneration is required, and looking at putting in place structures that allow government support for certain types of projects and private sector commercial operation for others. You asked me about the Fullerton Hotel earlier. That's an old government building in Singapore that is now a private sector hotel. There's nothing to do with heritage in the true sense of the word. It's now maintained as an old building and it's lovely, but that is a commercial proposition. There's nothing PPP about that. Government has acted as a facilitator there to bring in private capital that can see commercial benefit from investing in museums, low-cost housing, regeneration, museums, boutique hotels, high-end restaurants in nice old areas. And you don't necessarily need just government funding for that. You can look at all the different pools of funding around the Philippine market and the international market that will see the benefit of investing in tourism-related infrastructure in key parts of the Philippine market.
Paolo, back to that question. I mean, private sector will come in and will want a return on their investment, obviously. Yes. Not everything is CSR, right? Like trying to save the heritage. They would like to monetize their participation as well. But how do we create that balance between preserving heritage and, of course, giving back to, a return on investment on the part of private partners?
Well, the Singapore example is one of provision of the proper context for development, addressing or recognizing the importance of heritage, put heritage into the equation for national development. The MND in Singapore and the Urban Redevelopment Authority worked hand in hand to produce a physical framework for the development of Singapore post 1980s when conservation was already included. And that requires a regimen of strict master planning control, density control, the integration of the infrastructure of roads, the Land Transportation Authority. One can only, let me caution that one can only compare Singapore to Metro Manila and not the Philippines because it's the same size, although the population is half. We would have to look for other models for the the larger nationwide development. But in terms of Singapore, the provision of the context, the provision of a rational framework brought in the investors because they knew that they invested in building these hotels. And let me tell you, in Singapore, the locations for the hotels are predetermined, so they are fully integrated with the circulation system, starting from the airport to the roads to the MRT. And that is also being followed in places like Kuala Lumpur. You have to integrate everything. The problem with Metro Manila, as is the problem with almost all metro areas in the Philippines, is that the governance is fractured and you have half a dozen to a dozen national agencies aside from local government units to deal with. So you cannot even start to create in your mind that framework for investment.
I think one of the catchphrases here is privatizing heritage sites. I know a lot of us are allergic to that word. When you think privatization, you immediately feel it's the same as bastardization. But is there healthy privatization so that heritage is still maintained?
Yes, I think so. I think so, Mr. Saldran. Because if Singapore is not really a model that we should follow because of the differences that Paulo mentioned, I think Mexico would be a better example because we have the same kind of, more or less, colonial heritage structures. And in Mexico City, speaking of privatization, the richest man there, Mr. Carlos Slim, he bought a lot of old colonial structures in the heart of Mexico City. It's called their Centro Histórico. And he converted this into boutiques, hotels, cafes, bookshops, galleries, and very tastefully done and very successful. In fact, there are McDonald's there, but you don't see these enormous M signs and the clown outside. They're all inside. And outside, you just see a discrete brass sign saying McDonald's. So Mr. Slim's project, part of his social corporate responsibility, I think is something worth emulating in places like Intramuros perhaps, or in Iloilo, or in Talisay.
All right, let me bring in an interesting project that's already out there. Okay, I've come across a master plan for the regeneration or renewal of the area around Liwasang Bonifacio, the Manila Central Post Office. Controversial always, for sure, but your ideas about, I would imagine they were thinking of the Fullerton Hotel in Singapore as a former post office, converting that into a facility, transforming the park around it into green belts, the Metropolitan Theater, transforming it into an entertainment attraction. Your thoughts? I mean, this is a gem that we have right inside the city, but how to go about it properly? Gemma.
Well, I think Manila is really quite happy that that is going to be done by the PBP under the Department of Finance and, of course, the Fullerton Hotel. And I think other conservationists here like Paolo, Miko, and Mr. Capistrano, I don't think you have any objections to that, right, Mark? And Mr. Mayor. And if you talk to the head of the Philippine Post, Postmaster General Josie de la Cruz, who used to be governor of Bulacan, she's very enthusiastic about that project. It's going to be a great thing for the urban rehabilitation of Manila.
Miko, your thoughts on that? This is one of the concrete proposals out there. As we speak, local governments are thinking of how they can transform their heritage sites into international destinations. But here we have a ready-made facility, a post office, Metropolitan Theater, the gardens around it, river bank behind it. What's the potential of this?
It's actually a wonderful project, if you ask me. It has the makings of being able to regenerate a whole lot more than just that corridor between the post office and the Metropolitan Theater. You are talking about the regeneration of areas along the river, not just in the side of the post office, but also the other side. The escolta is there, and you also have, well, the key there, I think we were talking about it earlier while we were in a lull moment, was that you have to link it to so many other areas in that place. So you have to link it to Intramuros, you have to link it to Rizal Park, you have to link it to Binondo and Chinatown via Escolta, you have to link it to Araceros, you have to link it to Quiapo. So that in itself forms a bigger nucleus for a heritage area, because what people don't know is that, for example, if they walk through the Ere Hidalgo Street, between Quiapo Church and San Sebastian, they still encounter more or less the same feel as how Manila would have been 150 years ago. So all of those pockets are there. It just needs that one big push that this project may do for the city.
Undersecretary, if I may, usually when you look at the best practices all over the world, the key to their success is always access, transportation access. I know that's the DOTC on one side, but it's also road networks. It's also, if ever, subways or other modes of transport. Your thoughts on this? I mean, how the DPWH and other government agencies should actually be more involved in these master plans?
Well, in the case of public works, we're involved in road construction. I mentioned earlier that identification of projects or access roads leading to major tourist spots knows no boundaries. Well, in the case of case in point in Palawan, that they, where they constructed a road, about 100 kilometers of road, just leading to a mine site, forgetting about the most beautiful tourist spot here, aside from the other beaches like Boracay, which is the El Nido. This was left behind, and this has to be corrected now. Coron, Busuanga, which is about 70 kilometers, these two municipalities, is neglected down there, with 21 bridges, and we really have to put money here in order to promote this tourist spots. And to name a few, some of these blockbusters, which are proven to be our, revenue generating in terms of tourism. Siargao, we are putting on more money. Guimaras, the best mangoes in the world. We're promoting these access roads here.
All right. Paulo, you wanted to say something about the Manila project.
Well, let me make mention first that it's good to see the DPWH has changed its ways, because it used to build flyovers and demolish churches in its way. I'm sorry, but that's not the present administration. So, and which leads me to the point of Liwasan Bonifacio, or Plaza Loton is the old name. The first thing we should do is demolish those flyovers. And in fact, stop building flyovers in cities, because I just came from Bacolod. I went out the airport, and there was a flyover in the middle of nowhere with no traffic. So the concept of modernity to a lot of mayors, present company excluded, it's not in your town, it's not in your city.
Just at the border, I understand.
It's in Bacolod. Is to either build those flyovers, even though it's not needed, and the cost of one flyover can put street trees to one entire district of any city, or put a plaza. And the other is to, going back to Liwasan Bonifacio, I agree, and the point made by Miko is that Manila and a lot of our town centers were all walkable cities. That means people used to walk between 1 to 5 kilometers. Governor General Howard Taft used to walk from his office in the Intramuros to Malacanang. We have to bring back that scale and character of our central historic cores to be able to attract people. Singapore, you can walk anywhere from one end of Beach Road all the way to the other end, the Shenton Way. It's possible to walk the entire length of the Singapore River, which, by the way, is only 2 kilometers. We have a Pasig that's 25 kilometers. So these are the things that we have to and let me just point out that aside from our mayor here, there's another former mayor, now Vice President
Yes, I was
of
just
the
going to
Philippines.
acknowledge the presence of Vice President Jojo Marbinay, who joined us in the hall. Welcome, sir.
And-
Speaking of walkable cities, Makati
Yes,
City is trying indeed to be pedestrians, a walkable city
Yeah.
with the walku.
Few people know that the historic core of Makati is not the Ayala Makati, but the municipio and the areas around it. And if you go inside those streets, it is chock full of heritage structures, of a church that has even an annual festival and the Pabasa. You just have to look underneath everything.
Right, at this point, the microphones are open. Yes, we have microphones on the floor. Please approach the microphones, just introduce yourself and identify the speaker that you'd like to address your question to. If you have any questions, we're talking about tourism and heritage tourism in particular as a driver of both the local and national economy.
Yeah, excuse me,
Yes,
David.
Undersecretary.
Just one point regarding the thing mentioned by Paulo. Now, we have stopped the construction of the Lobok Bridge, just exactly pointing to the century-old Lobok Church, including the belfry there. Now, we consider this, that's why we stop it. We consider this as one of the engineering stupidities. Engineering stupidity. So we stop it. So no problem about it. Thank you.
All right, let me ask Mr. Capistrano. No? Usually when areas are privatized, tourism or heritage sites are privatized, the fear is always the gentrification or the exclusivity of the area, so much so that the locals who live in the area cannot afford access to the facilities in that area. And this may be a problem, for example, if not managed properly with the Liwasang Bonifacio experience, or even Intramuros with your new roadmap. How to balance again that heritage is a property of the entire country and not just those who can afford the expensive facilities, if ever, in these areas?
Well, we have always considered that we want to have historical and cultural conservation, tourism development, partnered with also commercial development, but at the same time, having the community still staying in Intramuros. That's why we have made efforts to coordinate with the different barangay chairmen. We are getting the help of Gawad Kalinga in helping us also in having livelihood projects for the people inside Intramuros. We want to keep Intramuros alive even at night, and we are lining up a number of activities so that people will feel safe and secure when they come to Intramuros.
Gemma, you wanted to say something earlier?
I just wanted to tell the Undersecretary that whenever we hear that the Department of Public Works is expanding a road, we heritage conservationists start to tremble because but why isn't there like a dialogue or a closer relationship among all the departments and private sector groups who are concerned with heritage? We really don't understand. We in the Heritage Conservation Society, we don't really understand why we are not consulted, or if we try to say something, we are ignored. And despite the fact that there is now a law, Republic Act 10,096, I think it is very difficult to enforce that law. And there are very few mayors, like our mayor of Talisay and of course our vice president, who are respectful of heritage. So Mayor, why do your colleagues like, changing the configuration of the town plaza, for example? Why do they cover it with this, these hideous things? And
I'm not sure the mayor can answer that for his colleagues, but
so why?
But I guess to reverse the question, to revise the question somewhat, how important is it really? Because mayors have that complex, no? To actually reconfigure their towns. But what is the benefit of actually keeping it as authentic and true to its history as possible?
Yeah, actually, it's going to be our project together with PPP Center of the Philippines. It is our City Plaza Complex Heritage Restoration and Redevelopment Project. Our old market will be recreated and use it as a mixed use, with a mixed use facility, and beside it is a century-old municipal hall, and beside it is a century-old church, and of course it is within also the vicinity of our plaza complex. So we believe that through this, the preservation or conservation of these heritage sites, we believe that we can create our own local attraction that can invite people. They will not only go to the ruins, they will not only visit Bacolod to see Mascara, but they can now drop by the city of Talisay and see our own heritage center in our city.
Miko, are our conservation laws sufficient? I mean, so much so that it should not allow sitting mayors to just reconfigure historical sites in their localities.
David, as far as our laws are concerned, we have excellent laws. It's how the laws are served, right? So, but I'd like to go back always to how communities should react to things. We always point to government, but then what are we doing as citizens, right? There was an article that came out in a Chilean newspaper that they were putting up a statue in one of the plazas, and one of the writers, prominent writers in Chile, just told them that, look, you don't live in a city because a city is beautiful. You're there because you make it beautiful. So the answer to that is with all of us. So if something is being torn down, what do? It's not always to put the blame on government. So it's also us having that voice. That happened, for example, you were asking earlier how it happens that when areas are gentrified, they become too exclusive. But for example, it is happening in Vigan, that it is a city that is so heavy on tourism, but nobody is excluded. You go there, you ride the calesa, and the cochero would tell you that, look, our city is World Heritage because of this, this, and this, and this. Everybody knows what they have. Everybody is on the same plane. So if everything is translated from top to bottom, then you'll have a fairly level plane.
Now, when you look around Asia, each country has its own, each country has many heritage sites, obviously, but there's always that one site that deserves or is given national attention, is promoted internationally. For the Philippines, what should it be? Is it Intramuros, hands down?
Yes.
Of course, you belong to the Intramuros administration. Paolo, I mean, because that's a debate in the tourism industry.
Yes,
is it the beaches? Is it Palawan? I mean, there's just so many things happening at the same time. But tourism planners also think that there has to be prioritization. There has to be some focus on how to brand and how to image the country through a heritage site. And what site would that be?
There are two types. One is urban, and we have a legacy from 400 years of urbanization. They used to say Bajo de las Campanas, beneath the bells, and it cannot be erased, and we must keep it because it's part of our history, although today it's Bajo de las McDonald's. And then we have everything else, which is 7,101 islands. And we have to look at that and really document it first, and then see how we can connect it to our infrastructure. But let me bring out, pardon me if I put the blame back on government. Every year and every other year we waste hundreds of millions of pesos, and I think this is something that Mark would be interested in. We hold a Palarong Pambansa, which is a national games, and then what happens is that in these areas that are for the national games, we spend hundreds of millions erecting white elephants for stadiums that are never used. A lot of this money can be put to the revival of city courts, a lot of them having the stadiums already there. I see a lot of cities with two stadiums, one less used than the other, and one was built for the Palarong Pambansa. And then we hold the Southeast Asian Games, every 10 years or so, and again we waste billions of pesos to fix quick fixes that never are maintained and the facilities are never used. So the key point is that you make it good for the locals, and hence all of our visitors will come and visit us.
Going back to Manila, I mean, when you take a look at the Liwasang Bonifacio plan, Liwasang Bonifacio is actually connected, even by foot, to Intramuros, and Intramuros to Rojas Boulevard, the whole bayfront. And even there, you can access the Rizal Memorial, Manila Zoo. Is there a master plan to actually connect all this and really maximize its potential?
Which one? There have been about 12 master plans for
Is there one that is workable and worthy of private investors?
Oh, they were all workable. It's that we never implemented any.
So tell me, what is the problem then? We don't seem to have a lack of ideas in this country. We seem to have a lack of...
David, with regard to master plans, Mr. Ortiz and I were discussing that over lunch. It seems that our main problem is really continuity, right? The president reigns only for 6 years. So even if he has a master plan, the next one will probably not want to continue his master plan. So you can have only like 5-year plans. Right? So it's worse for a local government official because a mayor only has a 3-year term but can be re-elected for 2 more terms. So when you're planning, you think, oh, well, I'm here only for so many years, so this is just the length of planning I'm going to do. So we're not really used to continue.
That should make some people worried. It should not. In any other case, it should not.
Yeah, there are a lot of mayors who really do believe in like something like good governance is good politics. So if you have a good program, good plans, a vision that can be implemented after a term, I'm sure that the next mayor who will be elected will continue to do that job. What we have done in our city is we have this multi-sectoral governance coalition. It is the membership are composed of from people from the multi-sectors, and through this group, they can make sure that what they have planned out a year ago can be implemented after 20 years or 30 years. What I would like to point out about local government units, how we can ensure that tourism can be pushed to the different LGUs. I believe, well, maybe through the Department of Interior Local Government, that they themselves can also promote tourism, that make sure, like what Secretary Robredo has been doing lately, seal of good housekeeping, seal of good disaster plan. So if there is, and having such seal, you can receive gifts or assistance, funds from the national government. If the DILG can do the same when it comes to tourism, I suppose each and every LGU will
All right,
we'll come up with this program.
Thank you so much, Mayor. Let's take the questions from the audience. I think we're a little high-tech this year, and we have a question that actually appears on the screen. So let's take a look. I think you can input your questions by text, I understand. Yes. Has anyone done a study as to which tourist spots actually attract more tourists? Heritage sites or modern attractions like Disneyland and Universal Studios? Funds, and we need to allocate these resources to projects which will bring the greatest return. I'm sure there are many studies out there, as you said, but going through those, what have the potential, Gemma?
The Department of Tourism has studies of the tourist spots that attract more tourists, and we already know that one of them is Boracay, and the other one is Intramuros, especially for Santiago, right? And I think the Ifugao Rice Terraces, and these days, the underground river in Palawan.
Of course, they use Disneyland and Universal Studios as an example. We don't quite have that yet in the country.
Well, we don't really want to turn our heritage places into a Disneyland or Universal Studio type of attraction. As a matter of fact, David, whenever heritage conservation is here, that tourism is interested in this heritage spot, we always say, oops, might become like Disneyland.
Could I just quickly add,
Yes,
the last statement in that question is, which one offers the greatest return? I think it's very important to consider that question from the different perspectives that it might have come from. From the perspective of the general population and government, greatest return is not necessarily dollars and cents, it's number of people that come through the door here in the Philippines. For someone building an integrated resort and a casino, they don't care about heritage, they care about dollars. So I think going back to the prioritization and what you're trying to achieve with your program, it's very important to get that right.
Paulo, quickly?
I don't trust government statistics, so I just buy the latest copy.
There's a lot of mistrust in this panel for government. I all of a sudden realized.
The best place to look at is the Lonely Planet, because that's where all the tourists go to and you can track the development of tourist sites from how it evolved in Lonely Planet. And Boracay was an entry 25, 30 years ago, was a small entry, and see where it went. Now that would be going to the other option of the Universal Studios. My dream project is to have an LVN studio tour, or a Sampaguita. I'm sure some of us who are more mature can relate. We should celebrate our own culture and our own even modern culture of Philippine cinema. And those are the things that we need to put into our tourism destination, not a Universal Studio, not a Disneyland.
I think just to go back to the objective of our discussion here, it's really how can the private sector, who have come from different parts of the world, really participate in the growth of tourism in this country. No? And so far, we've talked about the obstacles, which are real. I mean, there's no one's trying to pretend there are no problems. But let's talk about the potential, especially in Intramuros, Mr. Capistrano, because that's going to be the flagship project of this government. And tell us how, concretely, in real terms, how the private sector, in partnership with government, for example, can really make things happen at Intramuros.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, we have identified certain projects which we would like the private sector to participate in. I mentioned this construction of a boutique hotel. There is a lack of tourism facility, tourism accommodation, hotel accommodations.
Is there a much bigger project, for example, than just boutique hotels or coffee shops? These may seem a little small for such a grand, place like the Intramuros.
Well, the Maestranza Park, which I mentioned earlier, also, we envision it to become something like Singapore's Clarke Quay, a row of cafe shops and restaurants. We hope sometime in the future the DPWH will agree to construct a bridge connecting that part of Intramuros with Binondo, and have also development in Chinatown. As Secretary Jimenez mentioned in his state interview, what he would like to do is develop tourism cluster destinations. No? So if you have Intramuros connected to Chinatown via this bridge, Secretary Jimenez also mentioned Puerto Princesa as an example of a cluster destination, where you don't just go there for the underground river, you go for the Iwahig Firefly, the beaches, etc. But going back to Intramuros, yes, we have many plans for Intramuros. We think it will be the prime tourist destination. One of these is the lighting up of Intramuros, not only the streets but also the buildings inside Intramuros. Right now we have two main buildings, the Manila Cathedral and the San Agustin. In a few months' time, the the Bureau of Treasury will be opening or reopening the reconstructed Ayuntamiento building. In a few years, the National Archives will also be reopening, reconstructing the Intendencia building. We want to light up the facades of most of these buildings and have a night tour having audio guides explaining the history of these buildings.
All right, let me end this because we're out of time. Let me just end this by asking each one of you. We're done with Mr. Capistrano, of course, on the tourism potential of the organizations you represent or the localities you represent. And really, we're talking here to investors and how they can come in and how they can participate in Talisay, once again. Concrete projects, immediately, right now.
Okay, the one that I did mention is about this Talisay City Public Plaza Complex, Heritage Restoration and Redevelopment Project. The program now of the PPP Center of the Philippines, I believe, can really help a lot of LGUs because they're now focused on this partnership with the private sector, which we believe can really help LGUs to develop their locality.
Miko?
I think I represent too many things.
Intramuros one as well.
One of the things that I represent is Escuela Taller, and we are actually a school that trains people to do restoration work on old buildings. So this is a very good pool. It produces a good pool of manpower for the restoration of buildings, so it gives, it still retains the authenticity. The other two organizations that I represent are UNESCO and also the University of Santo Tomas, which are excellent sources of information. The university also has a center that goes out and deals with local governments, and the local governments are the ones that commission things such as cultural maps that are the lists of the cultural assets of each and every community. And with this data, you are able to find out if, what the tourism assets of these communities are.
Gemma, City of Manila, capital of the country, the first city most tourists actually see when they come to the country.
Well, I think that heritage conservation goes beyond pride of place and beyond tourism. It has something to do with strengthening our national identity and love for country.
All right, just quickly, final thoughts, Undersecretary.
Well, the Convergence Program initiative amongst DPWs and DOTC and DOT shows the need for a coherent spatial development framework for tourism, starting from the local government, as mentioned by Madam Gemma, and from this, the spread out of these development opportunities within the province for the municipalities and towards the regional area as covered. So we want no project will be left out as far as tourism project is concerned. Thank you.
Paolo, quickly.
Just two numbers. One specific number, 25 hectares. The Philippine Ports Authority area right beside the Intramuros is up for grabs. Those of you who want to invest, please go and talk to the PPA. Second number, only one. There are 7,100 reasons to invest in the Philippines. It's a no-brainer.
And finally, Mark, just some final thoughts.
I think if I was advising the government on this specific aspect, I'd say provide clear direction around what you're aiming to achieve and clear restrictions around ruining heritage sites by putting up McDonald's signs. And secondly, provide facilitation to allow the private sector to come in and invest in these projects when it makes a commercial proposition.
Well, thank you so much. A big round of applause for our speakers. I mean, just to close, it's very clear, and just to echo Paulo Alcazar, and there are 7,100 reasons to invest. In fact, there's more than 7,100 islands in this country, so even more than that. And really, there's no lack of sites in this country. There's no lack of potential. In fact, there's really no lack of anything if we all get together, government, private sector, and the citizenry. Thank you so much for joining us.